Hi everybody, it's Carol. I'm with the Barrie Public Library and I'd like to welcome you back into my sewing room today. It's winter time in Ontario, so today I thought I would show everybody how to make a nice cozy little infinity scarf. These are something that can be made out of any fabric. You can use cotton, you can use polyester, you can use a blend. What I'm using today, it's called cuddle cloth or minky. The one that I'm wearing right now is a wee bit smaller than the one that we're going to be making today, but it's nice and cozy and warm, and it just fills up the open neck area on your coats and your jackets. It's something that would be good for anybody. So we're going to cut the fabric lengthwise, and it's going to be 18 to 20 inches wide by the width of fabric, and then you'll cut it down to 36 inches long. So 18 to 20 inches wide and 36 inches long for an adult scarf. A teen scarf, you're looking at 15 to 17 inches wide by 30 inches long. And if you're making one for a child, you're looking at 12 to 15 inches wide by 24 inches long. So let's get started. So if you decide you want to make your infinity scarf out of cuddle fabric, as I'm doing today rather than regular cotton or polyester, there are a few things that you need to consider. Minky or cuddle fabric, as soft as it is a little slippery to work with. So you need to pin or clip it, or a combination of both like I'm using today, really, really well. Because it's also thicker than your average cotton or polyester, it's helpful if you have a walking foot on your machine and you use that, because the feed dogs on the underside will help pull everything through, and it'll just make doing your seams a little bit easier. So what I'm doing right now, we're going to fold the fabric lengthwise, and we're going to pin and clip it along the length. So you're folding it in half, right sides together, lengthwise, and then just really pinning it a lot so that it doesn't slip too much when you're sewing it. You're going to use a longer stitch length while you're sewing. So with your machine, set your stitch length to 3.5. And if you have a 90-14 stretch needle for working with stretchy fabrics, it works a little bit better than a normal needle that you would use when sewing cotton. But it's not absolutely necessary to go out and buy special needles. Just set your stitch length on your machine to a 3.5, and we're going to use our walking foot to help us get through. I have a number of pins all the way along. At the top, I've used extra pins and clips just to make sure that everything is aligned at the top, and at the bottom as well. I want to make sure that it doesn't slip too much so that the fabric separates, so I've got extra pins and clips at the bottom of the seam. If you don't have a walking foot and you're using minky or cuddle, just slow down your stitching, take your time with this. We're going to do everything with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And just do a little forward and back at the beginning. Make sure as you're going along that you don't sew over any of your pins or clips. Remove them as you go. Okay, so we're just coming up to the end of our seam here. Make sure that your fabric aligns at the bottom, which ours does. Okay, so we've finished our seam. Now we want to turn our fabric right side out. As when we sewed it right sides together. We're laying our fabric down on the table, the fold at the top, the seam at the bottom, and we're going to put our open ends together. In order to make this so we're not just sewing in a circle, but we have a loop in it, when we pick up the end, we're going to turn it once and then put our open ends together. So what you'll see is that you have a turn in the fabric. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your inside pieces, so the two pieces of fabric where it's right side to right side in the middle, and we're going to hold those really, really tight. So there we've got our two pieces in the middle. We're going to hold them, and then we've got an open side on either side of our tube. We're going to reach into our tube, grab the fabric at the bottom, and pull it up through our tube. So now we have a seam on one side and a seam on the other side. So they're 180 degrees apart, and we're just going to pin this top surface. So let's try that again. I'll show you that again, because this is the most confusing part of the whole project. And so lay it down on the table, fold at the top, seam at the bottom, and we're going to take our open ends of our tube and we're going to join them together, but we're going to put one turn, bring them together. So now you've got four sides to your tube. We're going to take the two middle ones, we're going to hold onto those tight, we're going to reach into the tube, grab the fabric at the bottom, and pull everything through so that our tube is now inside out on the outside. And then we are going to clip and pin everything together really well. Now where you have your seam, if you can keep it folded flat like mine is right now, it's hard to see on the dark fabric, but that will be just a flatter, smoother seam. And our seams should be directly across from one another in our tube. So we're just going to clip around or pin around the top of this seam. Now we want to leave a space on one side because we're going to turn the whole scarf through that opening. So we clip the one side, and much like on my other projects, if you leave a hand's width opening, that gives you plenty of room to turn everything around. We're going to sew from the inside, so we're going to lay this down on the bed of our machine, and much like when I did the oven mitt, we're going to sew along the inside edge. So we'll forward and back just to lock it in place, because we're going to be turning through this opening. We want to reinforce the seam there. Stitch all the way around until you come to the other side of your opening, and forward and back there just to lock it into place. And we're almost done. Okay, so I'm just showing you on the bed of the machine. I've got my tube down. I've done my forward and back just to reinforce the seam. I'm coming down here with a 1/2 inch seam, and we will just keep feeding everything through. So we're stitching from the top side here, which is the inside of our tube. And right now I'm just coming up to my seam. I want to make sure that that lays flat so I don't have any bulk, and I will continue stitching around. Now unfortunately I can't hold on to the camera and stitch with you. Let's see if I can get a couple of stitches in there. Okay, so there we go. You can see that. All right, now I'm going to flip it back around, and we'll just keep feeding this through to complete this seam. And remember, we're going to stop here where we've got the double clips, because that's going to be our opening to turn the scarf through on itself. Okay, now I'm coming up to the other side of my main seam. Just want to keep everything flat so there's no bulk. Just coming up to our double clips where we're going to have it open to turn. So again, we're going to forward and back just to reinforce that seam. So our threads are all trimmed. There's our seam, there's our opening right here. So now we're going to reach into the opening. And I actually did mine a little bit smaller than a hand width, which is what I had suggested that we do, but so it'll be a little bit more effort to turn it through, but we're going to turn the whole scarf through that opening. There we go. Okay, so where our opening is here, if we give this fabric a tug, it partially turns and folds everything in. And we just need to close up this little opening here, this seam. And we're going to set our machine to a zigzag stitch. And set it so that the zigzag comes right up to the edge of the fabric and comes in and catches it. So that's just going to close that little seam up. You want to make sure that you don't catch any of the other fabric in there when you're stitching this shut. Okay, so we are just going to change to a zigzag stitch. And we want to change, again, our stitch length to 3.5. It just makes it easier to do a longer stitch length when you're sewing this. Lift our foot, drop it down, and just making sure that the edge of that seam is pushed up against our needle so that it's catching it all and closing everything up. And then at the end, just a couple of forwards and backs. And believe it or not, other than trimming our threads, we are done. So there's our closed seam. It's not too obvious, but if you want to make sure that it's not seen at all, just turn your scarf over so that that closed seam goes to the inside. Pop it on. And there we go. So that will just fill in nicely in your jacket. Now this is the 36-inch long. My other one, the pink one that I had at the beginning, that is 30 inches long. So you can see there is a little bit of a difference in length. So if you want something that's a little bit shorter, that's going to just fill in right at your neck area, do the 30 inches, which is also a good size for teens. If you want something that's a wee bit longer, then do the 36 inches. So thank you for joining me today in my sewing room. When you're on the Barrie Public Library homepage, go to our digital resources, click on that, scroll down on the page that opens to learn, and then another page will open with all kinds of sites that we have to offer where you can learn some other skills. On there, there's something called Creative Bug. Check out Creative Bug. There are all kinds of projects and ideas. There's cooking, there's sewing, there's knitting. So if you're interested in craft projects at all, Creative Bug under digital resources at the Barrie Public Library. All right, so thank you for joining me today. It's Carol on behalf of the Barrie Public Library, and we will see you again in the sewing room soon. Bye-bye.